In 1964, a New Mexico cop pulled off the road, climbed a hill, and looked down at something that shouldn't have been there. And 60 years later, the U.S. Air Force still can't tell you what it was. His name was Lonnie Zamora. 5 years on the police force. He was married, a good church-going man, the kind of guy who shows up on time and goes home for dinner. He was chasing a teenager for speeding when he heard a roar in the desert. He turned off the road, climbed a low rise, looked down into a dry wash, what folks out west call an arroyo. And in that arroyo sat something he could not explain.
Rick Burke is a pastor. His brother Rob isn't. Together, they go looking for the stories nobody's telling on Sunday morning. Strange history, unexplained encounters, and the corners of the world where things get weird. Welcome to the Parsonage Files.
Welcome back to the Parsonage Files. I'm Rick.
I'm Rob, and man, have I been waiting to do this story. I love this one.
Yeah, today we are headed to Socorro, New Mexico. It's April of 1964.
What's going on?
Well, the Beatles had just been on Ed Sullivan. President Johnson was about to sign the Civil Rights Act.
Our parents were finishing high school, and Andy Griffith, he was on Monday nights.
Yep. And the U.S. Air Force came out to investigate this case. They sent some of the best people they had. But in the end, they couldn't tell you what Lonnie Zamora saw either.
Project Blue Book stamped this one as unidentified, one of only 701 cases that got that label out of the nearly 13,000 they investigated.
So let's buckle up. We've got a desert, we've got a cop, and we've got a sketch the Air Force kept locked up for decades. Let's go.
All right, so where does this whole thing begin?
All right, so picture this, Rob. April 24th, 1964. It's a Friday afternoon, about 5:45. And we are in central New Mexico, about 75 miles south of Albuquerque. And this is flat country, the kind of country where you can see a thunderstorm coming for an hour before it actually reaches you. It's also the kind of country where one could explode, let's say, a nuclear bomb. The Trinity site, where the first atomic bomb was tested in 1945, is roughly 35 miles southeast of where this story takes place. The White Sands Missile Test Range is just down the road, and Holloman Air Force Base is in the area too. It's late afternoon, and Lonnie Zamora finds himself chasing a black Chevy driven by a teenager who had been doing way over the speed limit through town. Then he heard a roar, loud enough that he thought a dynamite shack had blown up. And there was one out there used by the highway department. So Zamora let that Chevy go, and somewhere out there, a teenage speeder may have lived his entire life never knowing that he got away because of a UFO.
Best traffic break ever.
So Zamora cut off the highway, and he headed toward the sound. And the pavement soon ran out, and the dirt got rough. And his cruiser fought its way up a small hill, what they call a mesa, basically a flat-topped ridge, if you will. And at the top of this ridge, he stopped and he looked down into the gully. And he saw some pale rock down there, some burned brush, and something white sitting in the bottom of that gully. And at first, he thought it was a flipped car. I mean, it made sense, the roar, the smoke, and Lonnie Zamora thought to himself that some poor soul had rolled his vehicle off the highway. So he got out of his cruiser and he started to walk closer. But as he got closer, this white object stopped looking like a car and started looking like
a UFO?
Well, he said that this object was smooth, rounded, and egg-shaped, made of a whitish metal that he later said looked like maybe painted aluminum, and it was standing on two legs. But that's not the weirdest part. The weirdest part was he saw two small figures standing near the legs. They were dressed in what was described as white coveralls, And Zamora said that these figures were smaller than full-grown men, but not the size of children, and that they were moving excitedly around the craft. One of them turned and looked at Lonnie. The next thing he knew, he heard a sharp metallic sound like doors closing. He looked again, and the figures were gone, and blue and orange flames burst from underneath this object. And the roar that he had heard back on the road was there again, but now twice as loud. So Zamora did what any normal person would do. He ran. He stumbled, dropped to one knee, lost his glasses in the dirt. He eventually found his glasses and scrambled behind the cruiser, expecting the whole thing just to blow up. But then the roar stopped, and there was silence. And he looked up, and the object that had been down in that gully had lifted slowly, about 20 feet off the ground, and was just hanging there. Then it moved west, low over the desert, and was soon gone. The whole thing, Zamora says, took probably less than 2 minutes.
Right? He just kind of gets back up, dusts himself off, gets back in the cruiser, and calls in what he saw.
Yep. He's got those good cop instincts, you know?
He does. He really does have good police instincts. Right. And he also takes out that sketch pad.
Yeah.
And what he does is, before anyone else gets there, he starts writing down what he saw. And on the side of the craft, there had been markings. It was red, about 2 feet across, and centered on the body. He pulled out a piece of paper, began sketching it out right there, all alone in the desert, before anyone had any time to talk to him, before anyone could put any thoughts into his mind. He wrote down what he saw.
And, you know, there is another interesting piece to this. And this part comes from local memory in Socorro. It's not in the official Air Force file. So, I mean, we got to take it for what it's worth. But by some accounts in town, before Zamora ever drove back to the station to write up his official report, he made one stop first. He went to his Catholic church, and he asked for confession. So whatever he had seen out there had affected him so much that the first person he wanted to tell was God.
Kind of tells you about the guy we're dealing with, doesn't it?
It really does. So back out at the incident site, Zamora is sitting in his car, and he's sketching out that symbol on the side of the ship that he had seen. He then reaches over and he picks up his radio and he calls for backup. And the person who answers that call is Sergeant Sam Chavez of the New Mexico State Police. He was just a few minutes away, and he knew Zamora personally, and he knew what he was like under pressure. He had seen him in some scary situations. And so Chavez was a little concerned when he rolled up on the scene and he saw the state that Zamora was in. He said that he was pale, his glasses were dirty, and that he was trying to explain something that just sounded unexplainable. And it turned out Chavez had missed seeing the object by about 10 minutes. So he walked down into the gully with Zamora, and he noticed first that there were 4 marks pressed into the ground. He also noticed that there were no tire tracks leading in or out of the area, and most interestingly, no footprints anywhere around them.
Shouldn't there have been footprints?
Well, there should have been, because Zamora said he saw at least 2 little entities walking around the base of this craft, but there were no footprints to be found. One bush was burnt, and Chavez reached out and he broke off a branch, and to his amazement, it was cold, even though the fire that would have burned it would have just burned out minutes earlier. So, Rob, what happens after this incident?
So by morning, the story was in the local paper, and by the next day, it was on the newswire. Then, people began to descend on the site. Cars would pull off the road. Folks began walking through the brush, looking for whatever the cop had seen the day before. By noon, fresh footprints crossed the old marks. The site was completely trampled. But the right people had gotten there earlier. White Sands had sent personnel, the FBI had sent an agent, state troopers had arrived and roped off what they could, and a New Mexico state trooper started taking pictures of the landing marks with his own camera.
A camera that the Air Force ended up taking.
Now, you know, that's standard procedure for incidents on or near a military base. Anything photographed near White Sands could potentially be classified material, and they were kind of just doing their job. But it does make a much better story to say they was confiscated by the government.
And the FBI ran a background check on Zamora himself, and here are the words they used to describe him: sober, industrious, reliable. And, that doesn't really sound like somebody given to fantasy. Around the same time, somewhere on the highway south of Socorro, a man pulled into a gas station. He had his family in the car, and he seemed to be shaken up. And he told the gas station attendant that something had passed over their car a little while back. He said it was coming from the south, it was egg-shaped, and was moving fast. Now, he never gave his name, and he just drove off, and nobody has ever been able to identify this family.
Project Blue Book was the Air Force's official program for investigating UFO reports, and they explained most of what came across their desk. Balloons, planes, Venus low on the horizon. They could explain most of them, but this one they couldn't. So they had to send in their best man, J. Allen.
Okay, Rob, so who is Dr. J. Allen Hynek?
Dr. Hynek, perhaps the most famous UFO investigator of all time, was an astronomer, a professor of astronomy at Northwestern University, and, before that, Ohio State University, OHIO. Hynek was the U.S. Air Force's chief scientific consultant on UFO cases. His whole job was to find the normal explanation in things. He was a skeptic. He'd been debunking these reports for nearly 20 years, and when he showed up in Socorro, he thought he could figure this one out. He walked the site with Chavez and Zamora. He measured the impressions in the dirt, photographed the burned bush, talked to Lonnie Zamora at length, both alone and with witnesses present. Dr. Hynek had turned up looking for a crack in the story, but he couldn't find one. The Hynek who walked into Socorro thought that UFO reports were mostly just noise. The Hynek who walked out had a different problem on his hands. Just a few months after the case, Hynek wrote a private letter to fellow astronomer Donald Menzel. Now, Donald Menzel was at the time the country's loudest UFO skeptic, a Harvard astronomer who wrote books debunking sightings. And to this man, Hynek wrote, "Socorro is possibly the Rosetta Stone for the whole UFO question. Never has there been a stronger case with such an unimpeachable witness as this."
And then there was the sketch.
That big red insignia thing.
Zamora drew it before Chavez ever got there, before Hynek got there, before anybody could coach him on what to say. He said the symbol was about 2 feet wide, and it was centered on the side of the craft. And he turned this sketch into investigators. And after he did that, the Air Force did something really interesting. They asked Zamora not to share the real version of that symbol publicly. So for decades, they let an alternative version circulate. Similar, but a different shape. The reason was filtering for copycats. Anybody who later claimed to have seen the same craft and described the wrong symbol would be known to be lying. The actual sketch sat in a file for years.
What did the real symbol look like then?
Well, the version researchers believe is closest to what Zamora actually drew shows 3 shapes stacked on top of each other. There's a curved arc on top, kind of like a crescent, an upward pointing arrow in the middle, and a horizontal line at the bottom. Also didn't match any corporate logos at the time or anything that the Air Force could track down. They came up empty as to what this symbol was.
Completely unknown.
Completely unknown.
So most weird cases come down to one of 3 explanations: a hoax, misidentification, or military test. While Socorro never really fits any of these, let's go over them.
Okay, so let's look at a hoax first. Because no matter what the case is, somebody always says it's got to be a hoax. Maybe it was a college prank. New Mexico Tech is right there in Socorro. It's an engineering school. You got smart students, and you have all kinds of materials to build a fake spaceship. Almost works until you check into it. There were no tracks leading in, no tracks leading out. Nobody ever came forward. Not the next year, not in the next 60 years to claim credit. 60 years and not one frat house brag at a reunion?
Not realistic.
Not realistic. Plus, a college prank this elaborate is also a prank that could go really, really badly and get a lot of people in big trouble. So it doesn't seem like something that college students would have either been able or willing just to do.
And so option 2, military test.
Well, obviously, White Sands Missile Test Range is right there, along with Holloman Air Force Base, and both of those facilities would have classified activities going on at the time.
I assume the investigators checked into that?
They did, and both facilities said that there was nothing in the area at the time.
What about the lunar lander? It's 1964. Wasn't that bad boy up and going?
Well, the lunar lander prototypes were a thing at the time, but they were also not in New Mexico, but in California. And most importantly, they couldn't fly horizontally and silently the way the Socorro craft did. And if you think about it, the Air Force had the most to gain from coming up with some sort of normal, rational answer. And
so they really had every reason to find one.
Absolutely. And they looked hard. They checked everything they could. But to their credit, when they couldn't nail down a normal explanation for what Zamora saw, they reported it simply as an unknown.
All right, and then we had the final one, misidentification. Was it a balloon? A weather phenomenon? A plane catching the light wrong?
But Zamora was on the ground. He was about 50 feet from the object at the closest. And that's close enough to see landing gear. That's close enough to see the red markings on the side. Close enough to see two figures in white overalls.
A balloon would not leave 4 pressure marks on the ground.
Nor would it have little guys in coveralls running around.
All right, so what happened to poor Lonnie after all this?
Well, Lonnie Zamora, he went back to work. Same town, same patrol car. But the story, well, it followed him for a while. Reporters, researchers, strangers passing through town even, would stop and ask him to tell them the story, or to add parts to it, or to even admit that he made the whole thing up. The thing is Lonnie never changed his story. Not the next day, not a year later, not even in retirement. He gave his original statement, and he just let it stand at that. People asked him for the rest of his life what he thought it was that he saw. He never said. Kind of reminds me of the old show Dragnet, Just the Facts, Ma'am. Zamora was, I think, that kind of cop in real life. Right? He told you what he saw. He didn't speculate. He didn't dress it up. He didn't say what he thought you wanted to hear. He just said the truth as he knew it, and he let it sit there.
Lonnie Zamora would spend the rest of his life in Socorro, New Mexico. He married his wife Mary around 1954. At the time of the incident, they had been married about 10 years. They would stay married for another 45. Whatever he saw with her that day, his wife Mary lived with it longer than he did. He told her his version. She believed him. They didn't talk about it much after that, though. Together, the two of them raised a family, stayed faithful to their church, went to Mass every week. He worked his way to retirement from the police force. Then he took a job overseeing the city's landfill because the job was open and the job needed to be done. That's the kind of man he was.
And, you know, one of the things that I've always thought was interesting about this case is that Lonnie Zamora, he never wrote a book. He never went on the lecture circuit, never sold the rights to his story, never tried to monetize this incident at all.
Turn it into a career.
Nope. And he could have tried to make this into a career, but he didn't. He died in 2009 from a heart attack and is buried at San Miguel, about 10 miles from the place where he saw this UFO. And Mary outlived him by 11 years and is currently buried right there beside him.
And I guess that kind of just leaves the sketch.
Yeah, the sketch is kind of what's left of this case. And that red insignia, drawn by a small-town cop standing alone in a dry wash with dust on his glasses, still exists. The Air Force has had it locked away for decades. But it does remind us that whatever Lonnie saw, somebody or something had put a symbol on the side of it.
It was there for a purpose.
You would assume so.
Project Blue Book would close in 1969. The Socorro file was stamped unidentified, one of only 701 cases that got that label. And the case sits there 60-odd years later, exactly where they left it, unidentified.
Patrol officer walked into an arroyo on a Friday afternoon in 1964 and came back out a different man. He went home to his wife Mary that night, and he spent the next 46 years not talking much about what happened. Whatever was in that desert with him changed Lonnie Zamora forever. Today, he's buried about 10 miles from where he had this encounter. And whatever it was that he saw in the desert that day is still out there.
April 27th, 1964. 3:06 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. From Albuquerque to the Director, FBI. Subject, unidentified flying object. Socorro, New Mexico, April 24th, 1964. Information concerning. Air Force Office of Special Investigations, Albuquerque advises Zamora incident not known to be connected with military or Operation Cloud Gap. An additional incident has been reported as happening at 1 a.m. April 26th last at La Madera, New Mexico, about 70 miles north of Santa Fe. Captain, New Mexico State Police, Española, advises he interviewed only known witness, sober and frightened, of Santa Fe. Was visiting his father at La Madera. Went out to tend some noisy horses at about 1 a.m. Located about 300 feet from house, something shaped like a butane tank, possibly 12 to 14 feet high, and, quote, long as a telephone pole, apparently on the ground, and surrounded with blue-white flame, which appeared to come from portholes. He watched the scene for about 1 minute when flame went out. Object not noted to move. Was silent at all times. Witness went into house. Told father, who laughed at him. Next morning he visited site. Saw smoldering area. No other witnesses known to have observed the object. Military officers contacted advised the 2 incidents reported are not a part of a military exercise to their knowledge, and to date have no explanation. Bureau will be advised of any pertinent developments. End.
Thanks for listening to the Parsonage Files. Join us again as we explore strange stories from the worlds of faith, history, and legend.